I'm willing to guess that you've noticed that there are a lot more behavior issues in the classroom today. And if I asked you why, you could give a lot of reasons. Maybe blame the pandemic, parents, technology and social media, lack of admin support. And honestly, all of these things are true. And it's important to recognize that yes, we are facing a lot more challenges than we did in the past. However, dwelling on these things that are beyond our control is not that helpful. So today I want to share with you what you can control. And I want to ask you this. Have you ever noticed that even with all the challenges and all the changes, there are some teachers who are still able to teach while others are dealing with utter chaos? What's the difference? Let's consider a scenario of a teacher who is struggling and one that's not. All right, let's talk about a teacher that we'll call Anne. And Anne is not quite sure how to handle discipline issues. And by the way, no judgment for Anne. I was totally this teacher when I started out. So in Anne's class, students naturally push boundaries because they do that in every single class. So they start whispering to each other during a lesson. Anne isn't quite sure what to do about this, so she just ignores it. Because of this, the boundary line is not clear to the students, and so they just keep pushing it. Now they're whispering more and more during her lessons. Then they start throwing spitballs. Anne still isn't quite sure what to do, so she tells them to stop, but they don't. And she's not sure what to do about that, so she gives them a look and keeps going. Because she didn't really deal with it, the students keep pushing. They blurt out answers. They start talking more loudly. What started as 2 to 3 students whispering has grown to the majority of the class. Anne notices this buzz of chaos, but now she really doesn't know what to do. It feels out of control, and she's getting nervous. Now the students start to notice Anne doesn't know what to do. She's letting them get away with a lot. This emboldens them, and they continue. The next day, some students walk into class and start congregating rather than doing their bell work. Anne struggles to get class started. When she finally does begin the lesson, it's quickly interrupted by a rude comment. She totally loses it, yells at the class. The students are somewhat quiet during her rant, but Anne notices how they smirk and raise their eyebrows at each other. 3 minutes after her lecture, the chaos is right back where it was. Now let's pause a moment and consider what's happening here. Well, students naturally push boundaries. So if our line isn't clear, if we don't keep it clear, they're going to keep pushing the boundary further and further and further. Thus, what starts out as little problems don't stay little. As students push the boundaries, problems become bigger and bigger. Kind of like, imagine a little fire that's easily put out, but if it's not, it just keeps growing and growing till it's out of control. In addition, when we are unsure what to do and we're not even sure we're going to be able to keep control, students sense this lack of confidence, and it's kind of an unspoken signal that says you can get away with more. It emboldens them and makes the problems worse. So let's get back to Anne. After this bad day, Anne is frustrated and discouraged. She's not sure she's going to be able to do this for another week, let alone 20 years. So she goes next door to Mrs. Adams to see how she handles the issues. And here's what she notices. As Mrs. Adams is teaching, students push the boundaries. They whisper to each other during the lesson. But Mrs. Adams quietly walks to the desk and puts a yellow card on each table where students been whispering. Anne later learns that this is part of her warning system. When students are disruptive, they get a warning, which contains no consequence. But if they get 3 warnings, then there is a consequence. The students notice the warning card and stop talking. They refocus on the lesson. A few minutes later, another student issues a loud complaint about the assignment. Mrs. Adams smiles and calmly says, "You know I give you these assignments to help you grow into the amazing scholars I know you'll be." The class gives a collective half-groan, half-laugh, and Anne guesses they've heard this line a few times. Mrs. Adams later confirms, yes, she says this every single time someone complains about doing work. It's kind of become a running joke. Throughout the class, issues continue to crop up, but every time Mrs. Adams addresses it, and the class continues on, refocused. When they talk about it later, Mrs. Adams points out a few key points. She notes that students always push boundaries, but as long as she's consistent with holding the line pretty much stays where it is. As long as she deals with problems while they're small, they mostly stay small. And when big issues do arise, then she deals with them. And she's able to, because in general, the class is tracking with her. As a result, she's pretty much able to teach, and the students are learning and growing. Anne is convinced she needs to make some changes, but she's not quite sure how. There is so much chaos in her classroom and the bad habits are so ingrained, she doesn't even know where to start. Mrs. Adams tells her about a classroom reset and how helpful it's been in her own classroom, especially when she was a new teacher. Anne is intrigued and asks how it works. Here's how, Mrs. Adams says. You pick one area that's causing a lot of chaos, and you do something different to get students' attention. You want them coming to you and asking what's going on. She says you might take something out of the room, or skip a part of your routine, or do something weird to get their attention. Then, once you have their attention, you explain what the issue is and how things are going to be different. Then you're really consistent in addressing that issue from then on. Anne is not quite sure. Does this really help? She asks. Mrs. Adams says yes and tells Anne, here's what will happen. The fact that you did something rather than just saying stuff over and over gets their attention and creates a momentary reset. It temporarily douses that fire and creates a moment of pause. Then you are going to be super consistent in that area. And since your shake-up focused on one key problem area, you can be consistent because you're not worrying about everything, just that one area. The students will push the boundaries, but because you're consistent and the line is really clear, students will quickly realize this. This will not only help fix your one big problem area, but it will help regain your students' respect piece by piece. They'll see you mean what you say and that you stick to it. It'll also boost your confidence. This will help turn things in the right direction. And once this one issue is solved, you can repeat the process with other issues that you're having. Anne is sold and asks if Mrs. Adams will help her plan a reset, and they agree to meet after school to talk through the details. Later that day, Mrs. Adams helps her think through all of the important areas. First, she asks, what is your biggest area of need? What one issue will make the biggest difference? Then, they decide how to shake up that area. Mrs. Adams shares ideas, and Anne picks one she's confident will get their attention. Then, they clarify what should be different after the shakeup, and Anne decides to tighten up her expectations. They script out exactly what Anne will say during the reset and how she'll practice the new procedure with her students. They know the students are going to push the boundaries, so they work out a plan for how Anne will respond and exactly what she'll say when that happens. She practices it, and Anne becomes confident that I'm ready to use it the first issue. Mrs. Adams talks about how important consistency will be after the shakeup, and she gives Anne some pointers for how to stay consistent. The next day, Anne uses her shakeup. She does the reset, and she's amazed that it goes almost exactly as Mrs. Adams predicted. The reset creates a brief pause, and she's able to explain the new expectation. Pretty soon, a few students push the boundaries, but Anne has her pre-planned response ready, and she uses it. The students look a little surprised, but don't argue too much. Anne feels good and starts the lesson. A few minutes later, more students push the boundaries, but Anne keeps being consistent with her response. By the end of the period, she's actually lost track of how many times she's had to address the issue, but she's pretty amazed at how good it feels to be consistent. She addressed it pretty much every time, and by the end of the class, she can see the students are starting to get it. She knows she's going to have to keep being consistent, but she feels hopeful that this area could actually settle down. She imagines what a big difference it would make in her classroom. She'd actually be able to get through a lesson. Her students would be able to focus. Maybe they could even do more activities together. She knows she has a long road ahead of her, but for the first time, this dream actually doesn't feel impossible, and she thanks Mrs. Adams for helping get her pointed in the right direction. What about you? Can you relate to Anne's story? I sure can. I was totally Anne my first year of teaching. I've learned a lot, and you can too. You don't have to stay where you are. I would love to help you prepare a classroom shakeup, a classroom reset, just like Mrs. Adams helped Anne. I've created an on-demand workshop that does just that. First, we'll clarify your biggest area of need, the one issue to reset that will make the biggest difference. Then, I'll share ideas for how to shake it up and what will work in your classroom. Next, we'll clarify what should be different after the shakeup so the boundary is nice and clear. Then, I'll help you script out exactly what to say during the reset. We know students will push boundaries, so we'll also work out how you'll respond when this happens. You can practice it out loud and be ready to use the response on the first issue after the reset. We'll finish with some key pointers for how to stay consistent and a final mindset shift that is key to staying the course and not getting discouraged. And just to be clear, this isn't a training where I tell you what to do and then you have to find time to do it later. No, there's time provided during the workshop to actually make all these decisions and write everything down so that at the end of 90 minutes, your reset is totally prepped and ready to implement the next day. I'd love to be your Mrs. Adams, so click the button below or go to teachfortheheart.com/reset to get started.